Chapter 5 The Tempest. One day Faris Effendi invited me to dinner at his home. I accepted, my spirit hungry for the divine bread which heaven placed in the hands of Selma, the spiritual bread which makes our hearts hungrier the more we eat of it. It was this bread which Caius, the Arabian poet, Dante, and Sappho tasted, and which set their hearts afar, the bread which the goddess prepares with the sweetness of kisses and the bitterness of tears. As I reached the home of Faris Effendi, I saw Selma sitting on a bench in the garden, resting her head against a tree, and looking like a bride in her white silk dress, or like a sentinel guarding that place. Silently and reverently I approached and sat by her. I could not talk, so I resorted to silence, the only language of the heart, but I felt that Selma was listening to my wordless call and watching the ghost of my soul in my eyes. In a few minutes the old man came out and greeted me as usual. When he stretched his hand toward me, I felt as if he were blessing the secrets that united me and his daughter. Then he said, "Dinner is ready, my children, let us eat." We rose and followed him, and Selma's eyes brightened, for a new sentiment had been added to her love by her father's calling us his children. We sat at the table enjoying the food and sipping the old wine, but our souls were living in a world far away. We were dreaming of the future and its hardships. 3 persons were separated in thoughts, but united in love. 3 innocent people with much feeling but little knowledge. A drama was being performed by an old man who loved his daughter and cared for her happiness. A young woman of 20 looking into the future with anxiety, and a young man dreaming and worrying, who had tasted neither the wine of life nor its vinegar, and trying to reach the height of love and knowledge but unable to life himself up. We 3 sitting in twilight were eating and drinking in that solitary home, guarded by heaven's eyes, but at the bottoms of our glasses were hidden bitterness and anguish. As we finished eating, one of the maids announced the presence of a man at the door who wished to see Faris Effendi. "Who is he?" asked the old man. "The bishop's messenger," said the maid. There was a moment of silence during which Faris Effendi stared at his daughter like a prophet who gazes at heaven to divine its secret. Then he said to the maid, "Let the man in." As the maid left, a man, dressed in oriental uniform and with big mustache curled at the ends, entered and greeted the old man, saying, "His Grace, the bishop, has sent me for you with his private carriage. He wishes to discuss important business with you." The old man's face clouded and his smile disappeared. After a moment of deep thought, he came close to me and said in a friendly voice, "I hope to find you here when I come back, for Selma will enjoy your company in this solitary place." Saying this, he turned to Selma and, smiling, asked if she agreed. She nodded her head, but her cheeks became red, and with a voice sweeter than the music of the lyre, she said, "I will do my best, Father, to make our guest happy." Selma watched the carriage that had taken her father and the bishop's messenger until it disappeared. Then she came and sat opposite me on a divan covered with green silk. She looked like a lily bent to the carpet of green grass by the breeze of dawn. It was the will of heaven that I should be with Selma alone, at night, in her beautiful home surrounded by trees, where silence, love, beauty, and virtue dwelt together. We were both silent, each waiting for the other to speak, but speech is not the only means of understanding between 2 souls. There is something greater and purer than what the mouth utters. Silence illuminates our souls, whispers to our hearts, and brings them together. Silence separates us from ourselves, makes us sail the firmament of spirit, and brings us closer to heaven. It makes us feel that bodies are no more than prisons, and that this world is only a place of exile. Selma looked at me and her eyes revealed the secret of her heart. Then she quietly said, "Let us go to the garden and sit under the trees and watch the moon come up behind the mountains." Obediently I rose from my seat, but I hesitated. "Don't you think we had better stay here until the moon has risen and illuminates the garden?" And I continued, "The darkness hides the trees and flowers. We can see nothing." Then she said, "If darkness hides the trees and flowers from our eyes, it will not hide love from our hearts." Uttering these words in a strange tone, she turned her eyes and looked through the window. I remained silent, pondering her words, weighing the true meaning of each syllable. Then she looked at me as if she regretted what she had said and tried to take away those words from my ears by the magic of her eyes. But those eyes, instead of making me forget what she had said, repeated through the depths of my heart more clearly and effectively the sweet words which had already become graven in my memory for eternity. Every beauty and greatness in this world is created by a single thought or emotion inside a man. Everything we see today, made by past generation, was, before its appearance, a thought in the mind of a man or an impulse in the heart of a woman. The revolutions that shed so much blood and turned men's minds toward liberty were the idea of one man who lived in the midst of thousands of men. The devastating wars which destroyed empires were a thought that existed in the mind of an individual. The supreme teachings that changed the course of humanity were the ideas of a man whose genius separated him from his environment. A single thought built the pyramids, founded the glory of Islam, and caused the burning of the library at Alexandria. One thought will come to you at night which will elevate you to glory or lead you to asylum. One look from a woman's eye makes you the happiest man in the world. One word from a man's lips will make you rich or poor. That word which Selma uttered that night arrested me between my past and future, as a boat which is anchored in the midst of the ocean. That word awakened me from the slumber of youth and solitude and set me on the stage where life and death play their parts. The scent of flowers mingled with the breeze as we came into the garden and sat silently on a bench near a jasmine tree, listening to the breathing of sleeping nature, while in the blue sky the eyes of heaven witnessed our drama. The moon came out from behind Mount Sunan and shone over the coast, hills, and mountains, and we could see the villages fringing the valley like apparitions which have suddenly been conjured from nothing. We could see the beauty of Lebanon under the silver rays of the moon. Poets of the West think of Lebanon as a legendary place, forgotten since the passing of David and Solomon and the prophets, as the Garden of Eden became lost after the fall of Adam and Eve. To those Western poets, the word Lebanon is a poetical expression associated with a mountain whose sides are drenched with the incense of the holy cedars. It reminds them of the temples of copper and marble standing stern and impregnable, and of a herd of deer feeding in the valleys. That night I saw Lebanon dreamlike with the eyes of a poet. Thus, the appearance of things changes according to the emotions, and thus we see magic and beauty in them, while the magic and beauty are really in ourselves. As the rays of the moon shone on the face, neck, and arms of Selma, she looked like a statue of ivory sculptured by the fingers of some worshipper of Ishtar, goddess of beauty and love. As she looked at me, she said, "Why are you silent? Why do you not tell me something about your past?" As I gazed at her, my muteness vanished, and I opened my lips and said, "Did you not hear what I said when we came to this orchard? The spirit that hears the whispering of flowers and the singing of silence can also hear the shrieking of my soul and the clamor of my heart." She covered her face with her hands and said in a trembling voice, "Yes, I heard you. I heard a voice coming from the bosom of night and a clamor raging in the heart of the day." Forgetting my past, my very existence, everything but Selma, I answered her, saying, "And I heard you too, Selma." I heard exhilarating music pulsing in the air and causing the whole universe to tremble. Upon hearing these words, she closed her eyes, and her lips I saw a smile of pleasure mingled with sadness. She whispered softly, "Now I know that there is something higher than heaven and deeper than the ocean and stranger than life and death and time. I know now what I did not know before." At that moment, Selma became dearer than a friend and closer than a sister, and more beloved than a sweetheart. She became a supreme thought, a beautiful and overpowering emotion living in my spirit. It is wrong to think that love comes from long companionship and persevering courtship. Love is the offspring of spiritual affinity, and unless that affinity is created in a moment, it will not be created in years or even generations. Then Selma raised her head and gazed at the horizon where Mount Sunan meets the sky, and said, "Yesterday you were like a brother to me, with whom I lived and by whom I sat calmly under my father's care. Now I feel the presence of something stranger and sweeter than brotherly affection, an unfamiliar commingling of love and fear that fills my heart with sorrow and happiness." I responded, "This emotion which we fear and which shakes us when it passes through our hearts is the law of nature that guides the moon around the earth and the sun around the god." She put her hand on my head and wove her fingers through my hair. Her face brightened and tears came out of her eyes like drops of dew on the leaves of a lily. And she said, "Who would believe our story? Who would believe that in this hour we have surmounted the obstacles of doubt? Who would believe that the month of Nisan, which brought us together for the first time, is the month that halted us in the holy of holies of life?" Her hand was still on my head as she spoke, and I would not have preferred a royal crown or a wreath of glory to that beautiful smooth hand whose fingers were twined in my hair. Then I answered her, "People will not believe our story because they do not know what love is the only flower that grows and blossoms without the aid of seasons. But was it Nisan that brought us together for the first time? And is it this hour that has arrested us in the holy of holies of life? Is it not the hand of God that brought our souls close together before birth, and made us prisoners of each other for all the days and nights? Man's life does not commence in the womb and never ends in the grave. And this firmament, full of moonlight and stars, is not deserted by loving souls and intuitive spirits. As she drew her hand away from my head, I felt a kind of electrical vibration at the roots of my hair mingled with the night breeze. Like a devoted worshipper who receives his blessing by kissing the altar in a shrine, I took Selma's hand, placed my burning lips on it, and gave it a long kiss, the memory of which melts my heart and awakens by its sweetness all the virtue of my spirit. An hour passed, every minute of which was a year of love. The silence of the night, moonlight, flowers, and trees made us forget all reality except love, when suddenly we heard the galloping of horses and rattling of carriage wheels. Awakened from our pleasant swoon and plunged from the world of dreams into the world of perplexity and misery, we found that the old man had returned from his mission. We rose and walked through the orchard to meet him. Then the carriage reached the entrance of the garden. Faris Effendi dismounted and slowly walked towards us, bending forward slightly as if he were carrying a heavy load. He approached Selma and placed both of his hands on her shoulders and stared at her. Tears coursed down his wrinkled cheeks and his lips trembled with sorrowful smile. In a choking voice, he said, "My beloved Selma, very soon you will be taken away from the arms of your father to the arms of another man. Very soon fate will carry you from this lonely home to the world's spacious court, and this garden will miss the pressure of your footsteps, and your father will become a stranger to you. All is done. May God bless you." Hearing these words, Selma's face clouded and her eyes froze as if she felt a premonition of death. Then she screamed like a bird shot down, suffering and trembling, and in a choked voice said, "What do you say? What do you mean? Where are you sending me?" Then she looked at him searchingly, trying to discover his secret. In a moment she said, "I understand. I understand everything. The bishop has demanded me from you and has prepared a cage for this bird with broken wings. Is this your will, father?" His answer was a deep sigh. Tenderly he led Selma into the house while I remained standing in the garden, waves of perplexity beating upon me like a tempest upon autumn leaves. Then I followed them into the living room, and to avoid embarrassment, shook the old man's hand, looked at Selma, my beautiful star, and left the house. As I reached the end of the garden, I heard the old man calling me and turned to meet him. Apologetically, he took my hand and said, "Forgive me, my son. I have ruined your evening with the shedding of tears, but please come to see me when my house is deserted and I am lonely and desperate. Youth, my dear son, does not combine with senility, as morning does not have meet the night. But you will come to me and call to my memory the youthful days which I spent with your father, and you will tell me the news of life which does not count me as among its sons any longer. Will you not visit me when Selma leaves and I am left here in loneliness?" While he said these sorrowful words and I silently shook his hand, I felt the warm tears falling from his eyes upon my hand, trembling with sorrow and filial affection. I felt as if my heart were choked with grief. When I raised my head and he saw the tears in my eyes, he bent toward me and touched my forehead with his lips. "Goodbye, son, goodbye. An old man's tear is more potent than that of a young man because it is the residuum of life in his weakening body. A young man's tear is like a drop of dew on the leaf of a rose, while that of an old man is like a yellow leaf which falls with the wind at the approach of winter." As I left the house of Faris Effendi Karami, Selma's voice still rang in my ears. Her beauty followed me like a wraith, and her father's tears dried slowly on my hand. My departure was like Adam's exodus from paradise, but the Eve of my heart was not with me to make the whole world an Eden. That night, in which I had been born again, I felt that I saw death's face for the first time. Thus the sun enlivens and kills the fields with its heat.